Let me introduce to you the enterprise architect, Daljit Banger.
Hi,
Welcome, Daljit.
Hi, Jonathan. Glad to be back again. It's been a while. How are you?
Very good, very good. Actually, it's been, I think, 2 to 3 years. We were in the tail end of COVID or something like that. So the world has changed. I'm great. I'm actually happy that we're in I would say personally, in a much better position now than we were maybe when we had our last podcast. And maybe from just to set a bit of context here, technology has started to play a much bigger role in our lives, Daljit, even since we talked last. Do you want to mention anything on that?
The technology has moved on quite a lot. I mean, the biggest innovation going on at the moment is ChatGPT. I mean, if you have a look at that, we didn't have that last time we spoke, and that tool in itself is changing the landscape of most organizations. Everyone's thinking about large data models and thinking about how they can use generative AI, and Microsoft are bringing out Copilot and changes every day. So yeah, it's moving on, but it will always move on. That is the one thing, it's in a constant state of change, and it's never going to change, if that's the right word to use.
So I think that's a fantastic introduction to where we're going to go with this. Technology is like it's a rolling ball down a hill. It gets faster, it moves all the time, and we do have sort of structures. And we talk about the enterprise architect. There are organizations, TOGAF, etc., where there are frameworks in place for architects, and that needs to, at least those type of things need to adapt. But you're looking at something. One step would say meta architecture, looking at the idea of the mindset of an architect. Now, what does that mean to us?
Okay, so if you look at, I get to talk to a lot of architects, and I work with a lot of architects. And if you look at their day-to-day jobs, they produce artifacts, they produce products which try and solve point-in-time problems.
Yeah.
And if you look at enterprise architects, we can go through enterprise solution and technical, but if you look at enterprise architects, they follow what I call the cookbook approach. Have study the TOGAF, understand the Zachmans, and these frameworks are there. But when you step back and you think, okay, to grow an architect takes decades, it takes years. It's not something you can go and sit an exam, pass, and think, right, I'm an architect, because it's your experiences, it's those past experiences. But with those past experience comes biases and comes all kinds of things. For the past year, I've been thinking about the mindset. I look at enterprise architects, and you go from one company to another, and they have different ways of doing things.
Yeah.
But underneath that veneer of patterns and processes they follow, there is some common denominators. So what I've tried to do is I've tried to just step back and think, right, okay, what's the mindset of an architect, and what are the good things that how do we evolve that mindset? Okay.
Absolutely.
Now, I come up with a few definitions. So if it's okay, I'd like to share some slides with you. I think
Please do.
Is good. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay. But the whole point of the directional flight for my latest piece of work is really, I've been looking at how people produce solution designs. Okay.
Yeah.
And there is a process, and there are a sequence of steps that they follow. So there is this common denominator, not just about enterprise architects, but about solution architects, technical architects, the whole mindset. Yeah, so there's all these variables. And if I was to share a definition with you, which...
That's a great starting point, because I think if we have a clear definition, everything evolves from there.
If two people look at the same problem, they may come at it from different angles. And a lot of it is based on their biases, their past experiences, and all of that kind of stuff. Yeah, okay. Some of these methodologies are great. They try and put roadmaps for people to follow, but there are things that I call blind spots.
Yeah.
And these blind spots can be mixed. And so what I've tried to say is, look, the enterprise architecture or the solution architecture mindset is just a group of variables. Yeah. which when aggregated basically shape the opinions and thoughts of that individual architect. Yeah.
Yeah.
And there are certain things that I think that should be covered in that mindset, okay, which allow the realization of systems but services to the organization, okay. And the key thing is to avoid the blind spots. So if I was to say to you, right, okay, well, what should be in that bucket? You know, what should be those variables?
Absolutely.
You know, and that's a challenge in itself, because you think, right, okay, what are the problems that that individual's going to be tackling? You know, so what are those individual blind, pots that they need to consider? So just going to move on to the next slide. And when I stepped back, I started thinking about the holistic view. What should be in this mindset? You know, what are the things that the architect should be trying to not train himself for, but the experiences they need to pick to develop this architectural mindset?
Gotcha.
And based on our previous discussion, Jonathan, obviously the stack plays a big part of it, because within the stack, there's so many different components, yeah?
For sure.
But there's things that are not mentioned, because the stack is very much about products, artifacts, and deliverables, yeah?
Yeah.
So what I've done is I've taken a different viewpoint from it, and I've said, right, okay, well, if we look at the whole holistic view, we've still got the business operating model, and that's something the stack started at. But there's different viewpoints that we have when we actually look at that, yeah? And all the way down to the hygiene services. But also I've included another variable, which is the soft skills, the stakeholder management, the biases, how we handle presentations and all of that kind of stuff. So if I walk through each one of these elements,
yeah,
discuss each element. Now, we can reference it back to the stack, but when we talk about the stack, we're talking about products, yeah, which are more about the control and inform direct of an organization. Here we're talking about the architect who develops the products. So I hope that's clear.
Yeah. Sure. What I get from that, just to feedback from the first page, I obviously have a curiosity to those variables, but what you're looking at is what's the more useful perception an architect could have? What are the things in the environment beyond just the products and services that could contribute to their ability to optimize what's going on within that environment? Would that kind of summarize it, Daljit?
Spot on. And the reason I'm coming at it from, the mindset view is because, and in all honesty, it's because I've dealt with so many different architects. And when I start talking about architecture and different approaches, they all kind of, they are the sum of their experiences. And I think some of those experiences introduce bias, some of those, and there's some hidden agendas with a lot of these architects that I think have grown up over time. So if we step back and say, right, these are the elements that you should at least kind of consider,
yeah,
and then that makes you not a better architect, better person, it could be, but it allows you to deliver that additional value when you're delivering your services.
So could I ask one
Yeah.
quick question there? Like, is the typical architectural route, as I understand it, someone gets involved in the technical world and then they usually start at the bottom in some way, they specialize in a solution and then eventually become a solution architect, understand how it integrates with the environment from that perspective. Then they can move, just let me finish the hierarchy and then you can please. And then because that might be in a particular area, it could be human resources. Then they take that one solution and they apply their architectural knowledge to working with one solution to that sort of group of HR. We'll call it a domain architect for want of a better word. And then with enough experience, they can potentially understand not just HR, but finance, operations, all of the various other parts, and grow into becoming an enterprise architect. Would something similar to that ladder that I was described be the typical ladder for an architect? And would they bring the bias from their deep understanding of certain areas and, less understanding in other areas? Is that what you're thinking about, Andrew?
Okay, so if we step back and from what you've just said, you've just presented the classical view of the growth of the architect from, you know, your how you start your career to how you end your career. Well, not end your career, but
How you grow, how you grow.
Grow, how you grow. But the thing is this, that is the classical approach. And if you were to say, right, while you're learning all these skills and the projects you're exposed to, what are the things that you're missing out on? Yeah. The blind spots. And that's really what I want to focus on, the blind spots.
Fantastic.
So the first thing is, yes, it does apply to the classical evolution of the architect. But this is a bit more. These are the skills that I kind of missed on that journey. And, you know, for me, the key word at the moment is blind spot. What are the things that I missed? And those blind spots contribute to how you deliver as an architect. So if we go through each one, I think it becomes clearer as we get to the end. So let's just move through each one. Now, what I've done is I've just presented a set of things that you should think about, right? Okay. For example, and this applies to all architects, not just enterprise architects. But, and it goes back to the stack. And in the stack, we presented the things that, you know, you should consider when producing the artifacts. But what we're doing here is things that you should consider when developing your mindset. Okay. So horizon scanning is a no-brainer. You know, you look at what's out there, you're constantly looking at how the trends, how things are going to affect
innovations,
innovations, all of that kind of stuff. You also, as an architect, look at your, you know, as a percentage of revenue, how much is your, you know, how much are your systems actually costing you? Because we know that once you get beyond the 10%, it becomes, you know, uncompetitive. And so as an architect, you're always constantly looking at what's outside of the organization as well as what's inside of the organization. You know, so those are really the considerations that as an architect, you kind of, your mindset should be, and, you know, a lot of it comes from the stuff you read, you know, the seminars you go to, the people you meet, you know, the user groups you belong to, and that will evolve your, you know, thinking when it comes to how your business is operating in that particular industry. Then the next layer down, and this does map back to the stack, is really about understanding your organization and what are the kind of rules. Now, business rules can be internal, you know, what are the rules that your organization is following, but there may be rules imposed on, you know, your organization. For instance,
regulations
and your customer, all the usual kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Then once you know your rules, your processes, there's internal processes. And now as the technology ecosystem goes outside of the organization where we're using software as a service, you know, you've got to know about the processes that are external to your organization as well. Okay.
Absolutely.
And this is all about how you're thinking about things on a daily basis. You're kind of, you know, looking at your business, you're understanding some of the processes. You're looking at, and then when you're looking at those processes, you're kind of thinking, right, what are the key ones that generate value to my organization? Yeah. What are the value streams that we can measure against, you know, that when orchestrated, those processes actually deliver us value. Yeah.
Sure.
So these are kind of things that add to that mindset. Yeah. Okay.
Absolutely.
On
that, just that last one there about processes. One of the things that's the understanding of the organization as is. So I have a question around that, Daljit, is one of the things that impacts that greatly is the onboarding of whether it's new clients, new technologies, new business processes, the maintaining of it or changing it while it's in the organization, and then also sort of the decommissioning or deprecation of it as it happens. How does that play into that, or is this considered within that sort of the flow of?
That's considered when we talk about anything. It's not just about the point in time viewpoint, but it's you know, the future viewpoint. And then yes, decommissioning. We talk about decommissioning, you know, quite a lot, and technical debt. You know, these are all things that are part of that. But these are, to be honest, when we talk about, I'm trying to differentiate the mindset away from some of the products we produce, because the artifacts that we produce, you know, for instance, if we are going to introduce a new capability or service,
Yeah.
you know, that will affect, you know, the existing landscape, and that those are artifacts that are produced as part of the ongoing enterprise architecture work anyway. Yeah. But here we're talking about, right, what should you as an individual be kind of constantly looking for, you know, to develop yourself, really.
Very good.
Okay. So the next thing is also the capability, you know, I've just mentioned capability, and that's the layer in between the processes and the enablers. And obviously services come within that. But when we're looking at capabilities, we are, you know, solution architects, technical architects, enterprise architects, you're always looking at, right, what are the capabilities that the organization needs? Normally the enterprise architects develop those capabilities, but the solution architects and the technical architects realize them. Yeah.
Yeah.
But what, you know, if we step back and we say, right, okay, great, we got a capability map, you know, we've laid down all our business capabilities, our technical capabilities. What should I be thinking about? You know, what should I be thinking about? And what you should be thinking about is, right, okay, going back to the value streams and going back to the business operating model, how is that going to change? You know, so
yeah, absolutely.
your thought process is all about, you know, your organization isn't static, it's going to move on. So how is that going to change? You know, and with the services, okay, on a day-to-day basis, the products and services, they're defined. But now you've got to start thinking about, right, okay, who are my custodians, right? How are these capabilities and services actually interconnected? So, and we talk about the custodians and stakeholders later on, because that's a big part of the mindset. Yeah. Okay.
So just on that word, because I think a bit of clarity from the word custodian, because a couple of thoughts came into my mind. You know, you can have the custodian, i.e. the owner of a business area or the owner of a particular solution, or you could have the owner of processes that integrate certain ones. What could you maybe define? Because custodian could have a few different interpretations, what that could mean, Daljit.
Yeah, this came from when I was doing a piece of work on data sets, and I was thinking about who actually not only owns them but manages them. You know, who's ultimately responsible for them. So when we talk about custodians, a custodian could be a producer of that service, but it also, you know, could be an owner. But it's also, for me, it's about the person who's responsible for it. You know, basically. And that could be one person, that could be a team, it could be a group of people, it could be an individual, it could be anyone. But it really is about, you know, when you start looking at roles and responsibilities, it's not, you know, everyone owns the services in an organization, because,
Sure.
you know, but it's about who's responsible for delivering that service. So for me, it's about the responsibility. A custodian implies ownership, yeah, but here it's more about, not so much about ownership, but more about responsibility, if that makes sense.
Gotcha. Yeah. What's coming to mind as I'm watching what you're saying, it would be very interesting to map what you have here to the coverage in an organization with respect to how do the architects own each of these pieces of an organization. I'm just visualizing as I watch what you have, a kind of a dashboard that brings up each one of these points and sort of highlights where the architectural, I would say, coverage is strong or weak within an organization.
When we talk about these services and capabilities, and we talk about custodians and ownership and everything, and I'll go back to my original kind of, when I introduced it, the blind spots.
Yeah.
And by understanding who's responsible for these services and interacting with these people, you can then kind of move into that mode of establishing what the blind spots are. And those kind of blind spots, you know, are the things that kind of add, you know, they're the things that should be missed, basically. Yeah. We are really moving into a new world of cloud computing. I mean, it's amazing, the transformation, how we're moving everything off premise into the cloud, or, you know, or another hosting model. So when we talk about enablers, now this is one of the biggest challenges, and this is why I've thought about the mindset, because this year I'm working on the Azure cloud. Okay.
Yeah.
Last year I was working on Amazon Web Services, and the year before that, Google, right? Each one of these clouds have great offerings. They are, you know, the amount of services and capabilities that are available in these things is a beast. But the thing is, if you as an architect are constantly focusing, you know, if you look at Azure, for example, and you just look at the API side of things, I mean, the product is amazing. Yeah. Microsoft have done a fantastic job, but you could spend your whole year just learning about it, you know, and the integration. So what I've said here is when we talk about, you know, understanding the enablers, it's, yeah, sure, know about the offerings, you know, because they're common, you know, there are common across all of these. Your job as an architect, it depends on the type of architecture you are, is just make sure that, you know, you understand the services offered across these cloud offerings, because then you can start looking at specifics within your own instances. Okay.
Absolutely. Can I ask you a question on that? Because recently
yeah, sure.
I've been working with sort of a company that's using Microsoft technologies, and in particular they've started using the cognitive services, and because you mentioned AI and ChatGPT, and because you did also mention we need to learn the capabilities or the APIs of a particular service. How will things like the Microsoft Cognitive Services, which actually goes into all of the various data within your Microsoft suite and all the services and extracts what you want via the cognitive services, help architects probably lessen a little bit their need for all of the individual API understanding, because that will enable to some degree them to retrieve the data that they want? How is AI having an impact on those sort of cloud services?
I think, I mean, if you look at, okay, you mentioned Microsoft. If you look at Microsoft and you look at Copilot, you know, they've got a Copilot for all of their products. And some of these aren't switched on. But if you look at the way they execute their services, it's already embedded in these products. I think there's some major changes coming, but the one thing I would say about AI, and it's a topic I try not to discuss because it's a moving, you know, it's a moving train at the moment. There's so much going on, so I'm kind of keeping out of it. But for me, I was reading some research, and it really is about context. You know, you can have as much data as you want, but it's context. You could ask, someone asked a question, I can't remember the paper, but they asked the question and they got two different responses. And one of the responses, you know, it was really about the context, you know, and it's a moving train, and it's moving fast.
I kind of agree with you. I think it's probably not mature enough to rely upon it yet, but yeah, we can see the direction it's going.
For me, the biggest thing is about privacy. The worrying thing is about privacy. As an author, I mean, I'm writing another book at the moment, and I have, you know, the thing is, I needed to, I'll give you an example. I needed a table of contents for a solution design. Now, we've all seen these, and, you know, but I didn't want to refer to anyone else. I said, right, what would I want to see in a solution design? Okay. And so I did the table of contents, and then I thought, oh, well, I'll start populating it, you know, as you do, get carried away. And in the end, I ended up producing a 15-page document because I put my notes in, right?
Yeah.
Now, that's taken me over a month, Jonathan, right? Just to do, I mean, to be honest, it's all there. I could do a Google search and it's all there, but I wanted it to be fresh. It's, you know, from my experiences. Now, as an author, right, I will put it out there, right? And you know, and I know that's going to get plagiarized left, right, and center. Okay. And the worrying thing about this AI is really, as an author, you produce content, you give it a lot of thought, and then someone could just, you know, include that data set into their language models, and then someone could use that. And that's the worrying thing for me. So
does that mean the ideas of sort of copyright, patent, trademark, IP protection in general are at risk, do you think? Is that one of those aspects?
I think that's a major risk at the moment. The EU introduced a law last week. I've not fully read the law, so I can't comment
Yeah,
on
no,
it.
I've seen the highlight one pager of it. I
Yeah,
haven't.
they,
Yeah,
they introduced, and and they're the first ones to do it. I think, look, for me, I like producing content, and I like to use my own brain to do it. Yeah, you can Google and you can do stuff, but I rather learn from my own mistakes.
oh, fair enough.
But
Fair enough.
anyway, going back to that, that's just the way I develop my mindset. I take sources, and then going back to this, so the enablers, I personally think the enablers are constantly changing. Okay. And
Sure.
as an architect, you just need to know the high levels. If you're working at solution and technical level designs, then yes, you do need to know the lower stuff. But this is knowledge you acquire as you go through it. As a generic mindset, there's common traits and common features in all of these cloud services. And that's what I think you as an architect should be, your mindset should be evolving. Okay.
Excellent.
And then the components and devices. The reason I've put this in here, right, was I just threw it all down.
Sure.
As an
Top to
architect,
bottom.
yeah, as an architect, what are the kind of things that I want to know about, right? So for the enablers, I thought applications, virtualization, containerization, channels, data, and reference models, all of that kind of stuff. Yeah. And those are products that you're kind of exposed to on a daily basis. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The components you need to be aware of, right? Okay. The protocols, the containers, the libraries, the inventory, all of that kind of stuff, they're all to do with the controlling of the environment. Yeah. And you just need to know, how is software constructed? You talk about
Like I think one part of that, or at least from my understanding, Daljit, is by knowing something at that level, you also know the limitations of what you can do. That seems to be that's the area where you hit your head against the constraints of what you might even be considering, or the cost of what it might cost to go further than that,
Yeah. I mean, to be honest, we've just, we're launching our sanctions portal early next year. So we've spent a lot of time thinking about it. I've spent a lot of time with the developers. They're all offshore. And to be honest, I don't need to get to the low level details so long as I can understand how it's all working. Yeah. Now the question is, how did I acquire that knowledge? Okay, I acquired that knowledge by doing several years ago, but that knowledge is still there. Yeah, it's part of the standard evolution. Devices, I think, for me, as an architect, as an enterprise architect, there's a lot of arguments. Why do you need to know this stuff? They're commodity services. Okay. But if you look back here, I've got a Linux box up and running at the moment.
Good man.
I do it as part of a passion, but also it's because you know how it all hangs together, right?
Oh, for sure.
And that's quite important. So what I've done is, what I've tried to do here is say, right, okay, those are the kind of technical system type areas, but there's a set of other skills that you need, the soft skills, okay? And when we look at our brains, we've got the logical side and we've got the creative side. And, I did this presentation years ago where I started thinking about, right, am I using my left side of the brain or the right side of the brain? And here, what I tried to say is, right, there's a part of every architect, and this applies to most people, where you need to kind of bring your creativity side to your logical side to deliver a solution which has the wow factor. Yeah.
Well, I think that's what's really important, Daljit, here. It is as much as there's a science to all of the technical element, there is a very creative, the ability to aggregate technologies to make something new happen, to even divide them to make something new. I think sometimes even developers and architects underestimate their creative capability, but it's very much that as part of the work they do,
Yeah, I totally agree. And what I've also thrown in is these are quite important skills, and these are skills that I personally have not really focus my research much on, but it's just part of your kind of DNA. So the presentation skills, the negotiation skills, managing people. And, you know, when we talk about negotiations, you know, they could be rational or they could be emotional, and, you know, you could introduce bias. How do you make sure that all your kind of negotiations you're doing with, you know, your suppliers, your vendors, whoever, are rational, you know? So that's a
Absolutely.
part of the thought process as well. Then when we talk about people, you know, when you're working on a project or you're working with senior stakeholders, you're constantly either trying to persuade them, you know, that a position is correct, or you're trying to influence, nudge them in the direction that you want to go in. So these are other skills that kind of evolve over time, and they need to be part of your mindset. You know, these are things that you need to kind of consider.
Well, I do think, and like you're one of those people in the sense that you've a lot of knowledge when it comes to how things can work, the technologies behind it. So when you're talking with senior stakeholders, you probably have to make them aware of things they weren't aware of, educate them to some degree, just as part of the process of even to explain it. So like what you're saying here about communications makes so much sense to me, because in that complex technical world, they don't even maybe want to know some of all of the things that you know, but you have to bridge that gap in some way, don't you?
Yeah, I agree. And the other thing, so we're talking about the negotiation skills, the people skills, the presentation skills. These are skills you can evolve over time.
Sure.
There's other sign of hard skills that I think architects, you know, you mentioned the evolution
Yeah.
going from X, Y to Z. But what they miss along the way is some of the financial skills, some of the budgeting skills, some of the, you know, and I I did a costing last year for someone, and I kind of, you know, when I presented it to them, they were like, "Wow, you know, wow, this is, you know, how did you come up with that figure?" And then I did the full traceability and the audit, and it was because, you know, you've had some financial training, you've had, you know, some basic accounting training. You know, you need to be able to differentiate between OPEX and CAPEX and all of that kind of stuff. And these are kind of, I think this is the biggest hole, actually. I think this is the stuff that gets kind of missed, and it's kind of the soft skills and the kind of
So
skills that are required to deliver your services, I
So
think.
like I'm really thinking, in terms of education, it sounds like the education of an architect, it has a primary school, how do you say, body of technical understanding. But because we live in a business world, there's these financial capabilities, communication capabilities. It feels like you're building a sort of more comprehensive
Yeah.
set of learnings that an architect may need to do outside of that sort of just technical framework.
Yeah, and the reason we're doing this, Jonathan, is it's not how we approach our stakeholders, because at the end of the day, we're always talking to our stakeholders,
Sure.
but it's about more important about their perception of us as architects. Because if they do see you as, you know, technically focused, delivering solutions, they kind of step back. They may not always take on board your messages. So it's about managing your stakeholder perceptions of architects as well. All of these soft skills, when they aggregate together, they kind of help the perception of the architects when it comes to the stakeholders. And the reason we need to manage that perception is because if we are perceived as just guys that are delivering technical capabilities and not giving the value to the business, yeah,
Yeah.
then we're never going to be invited to for the main course. We're always going to be in there for the dessert.
So would that mean then, to some degree, some architects at the moment are too dependent maybe on a finance team or a project manager or whatever, or they should be able to better align with them because they have those skills and the stakeholders?
I think the skills evolve over time, but it's the way of thinking, and
Yeah,
that's what helps the alignment. Because if you've got good communication skills, you know, you're always going to be that person that, you know, that go-to person, because they feel comfortable communicating with you. And that's why I said it's about the perception of architects when it comes to the stakeholders. And you know, there's a lot more I could have thrown in here, but for this podcast, I just thought, you know what, I'll just throw in the key main ones, which are
Absolutely.
the people, the negotiation, and the presentation. The financial skills you can evolve over time, you know, that's quite easy to pick up.
This
So,
would be interesting then, Daljit, as well, because you act as an architect, but sometimes you also hire other architects. I imagine having if I was an architect looking for a job to work on your team, you'd have quite a broad set of considerations in our conversation. It wouldn't be just technical. It would be how I would
yeah,
talk to you. It sounds like it would be an interesting interesting interview, you know?
yeah, maybe that's one we can cover off. The problem with interviewing for architects, okay, there's variables that you got to look for where you know the person can deliver a great service. So for example, you may be looking for a data and information architect.
Yeah,
Now, their analytical skills may be fantastic, but their communication skills aren't great. And when you're interviewing people, you need to kind of look under the cover to work out, right, okay, their communications, they're the doers, you know, put them in the boiler room to actually get on and, you know, stoke the engines, but do I want to put them in front of customers or in front of clients? So
sure.
that whole topic in itself is quite a fascinating topic. And as we move through the mindset, you know, let's go back to, you know, we've talked about the soft skills, and then if you know, we mapped everything to the stack, and the stack can actually have all these products which you can
Yeah,
think about certain ways of thinking at each layer. And the next thing is really about, you know, the complete bucket. It's all the other things, you know. And as architects, you know, you constantly need to be thinking about, right, okay, what if I'm hit with a virus? You know, what if I'm attacked? You know, what if my organization is attacked? How do I respond to that? You know, look at the inventory. How do I manage the technical debt? All of these kind of things are there in the background. Yeah. All the stuff that kind of gets missed sometimes. Yeah. I worked with a project, and it was an agile where they were defining the sprints and everything. And you know what was missed off it? You
no,
know, the alerting. How do you, you know, because it wasn't a user story. It should have been, but it wasn't. So as an architect, you step back and said, well, what have we missed? You know, login, alerting, notification. These are kind of default things that you think about. So
I have a question there, Dodger, because I wouldn't be as in-depth on this. Like you call it hygiene considerations. And in a way, when I was listening to you mentioning alerts, I was kind of thinking, what's the topic in my mind is operational awareness. What happens as operations are undergoing? What needs to be
service
paid
delivery.
attention to? And are there architects who specialize in operational awareness or hygiene
Yeah,
considerations?
they're called service architects. And service architects work within the service delivery
Yeah,
domain. And part of service delivery is knowing when something goes wrong. You know, you parse log files, you get alerts. You know, so yeah, there's different classifications of architects as well. Yeah,
sure.
what we're trying to do here is, even those service architects, I'm trying to say, right, okay, you know, you may be a service architect, but think about the business operating model. You know, how does your business operate and how does it actually conduct itself? What are the threats outside of the industry that may come back and hit you? You know, so it's a whole holistic view, you know, which leads me quite nicely onto the next slide. And it is that holistic view. Yeah. Um, when we put it all together, and I know we've covered quite a lot, and you know,
Sure.
probably not given each area enough justice. But these are big topics in their own rights. But it is, when you look at the whole thing and you look at the holistic view, all of these things add up to kind of, you know, it's like one big stew. You know, when it's all cooked and you've consumed it, you're kind of in that position where you should really be avoiding those kind of blind spots that we've talked about. And really, we're not just talking about hard skills where you're learning, you know, how do you produce a solution design? How do you produce a technical reference model? How do you produce a
Sure.
governance? And, you know, it's about some of the soft skills as well. And those are the kind of things that are embedded in the whole, you know, across the whole stream. And that makes you a better architect. And really, when we talk about the EA mindset, We're talking about all of those things, that kind of, it's just a way of thinking. And how do you get to that point of thinking? It's having all of these other things to think, all these little compartments that you kind of considered.
Well, I have an image that comes into my head if I was to work in an organization with you, Daljit, is you might bring all of the different types of architects together, the solution architects, the domain architects, the service architects, etc., and somehow explain to them, and maybe this is what you're trying, because I'm getting this impression from your presentation, explain to them how they all individually contribute to the business and how they sort of interact or how they're most useful to be with each other. And is that, that sort of team leadership as well of, here's how it fits together is the enterprise architect, and explaining to them how they're relevant to what happens.
Yeah, what I'm trying to think about, okay, and this is the kind of foundation for this. When an architect moves from company A to company B, okay, the thought processes don't change, the products do. Yeah. For example, you may be using PeopleSoft in one company and you may be using something else in another. CRMs vary and all of this kind of stuff. What I'm trying to do here is just say, look, step back, the thought processes stay the same. And if you encapsulate the capability services and enablers, moving between organizations becomes a lot easier. Yeah,
sure.
Looking at different technology eco stacks and all of that kind of stuff becomes easier. It's just you as an individual. How do you evolve into a position where, you can land in a company on day one and kind of get it? You don't have to go through this deep learning curve. And really, that's it. Because when you buy architectural services, really, you want those people to land and deliver from day one because they're expensive resources.
Absolutely.
And if we've got a kind of unified way of thinking, you're kind of all talking from the same, sheet, and it just makes life a lot easier. And going back to my original point, it's about avoiding blind spots, and these blind spots often occur.
Well, I'd like to, I think, first of all, thank you for the tour through the sort of big picture down even to the details and also how they fit together. I went through your book and there's a fantastic amount of information there, Daljit. What's the best way, and this is probably more about education, for architects to, I described the classical model that most people probably know who work in the tech industry, is what is now becoming improvements upon that way. It's not going to change that either, but what are additional things that people can do to start to develop the mindset that you've said, besides obviously sort of listening to this, understanding those bigger concepts? How can they, cultivate that over time so they go in the direction that you're talking about,
Yeah, I think that's a real major challenge. Knowledge that I personally have acquired has been over decades and working in projects. That's where you really get your experience. But then I read a lot of academic papers. I read a lot of, and to be honest, it's not about me, so I don't want to go into my way of doing things, but there are certain patterns that we can observe, and it really is about, if for example you're spending okay, let me step back and say this: technology changes. You can spend 5 years learning Azure and all of that, and it's great at that point of time, right? But in 10 years time, that may not ever be relevant because something else has come on, right? So if we assume that, look, technology, the products, they are going to change, but underneath that, the core principles and the concepts remain the same. And it's really about learning those core principles and practices and all the other good stuff. And this is where the mindset comes in, because if you think, right, okay, you know what, I want to evolve my architectural mindset. In order for me to evolve my architectural mindset, I need to understand how my business works, how a business works. I need to understand that once I know how that business works, I can work out what the key value objects are in my processes, my value streams and all of that. Okay. So that's the business side of things. Okay. Then as an architect, you say, right, okay, well, how do I catalog And that's what it really is. How do I catalog my capabilities and services? And then how do I map those? This is the technology side of things. How do I map that back to the technology? So this, the left side of it, is something that's going to be with you for years. The right side of it, the components, the devices, that will change. But underlying all of that is those soft skills. And those are the things that need to be built up slightly over time as well. And what that leads to is an architect with longevity. And
Yeah, yeah.
it's not words really we should be looking at, but it's about, and also it's an architect that's perceived as adding value, not someone who's just technical in the corner, So I hope that makes sense. I mean, that's really what the
Absolutely.
mindset is all about. And it all ties back to the stack,
Could I ask one more question, which is kind of an area we just didn't dive into a little bit, is data has changed as well as products and services, and the amount of data that we store in the cloud and the possibilities of the reports that different users can have, or information that can flow through all of these processes. And that sort of gargantuan change in the amount of accessible data, there's so much now that you don't even want it all. What role does an architect, and this is more on the business side, but obviously the architect gets involved in it, in sort of reducing that data quantity to the most precise information that's the most useful in another part of the business. Now, it's a business concept, but I'm just curious how the architect plays a role in that.
Well, the architect, I mean, the data architect's quite fundamental in most projects at the moment, because you need to, as you said, you need to understand what's there and how it's going to be used. But the key thing is, I mean, we got to differentiate between data architecture and data cleansing. Yeah, data cleansing is removing all of the, all the crap that you don't want there, right?
Sure.
The data architecture is looking for informational value and how that information is actually exposed out. And if you're looking at large data sets, and you're looking for patterns within that data set, you do need vast volumes, and you may need historical data. But it's about data rotation as well. For example, on our sanctions portal, I'll give you an example.
Please,
so we've got data coming in from multiple sources in multiple formats, and we put it into one big pot. We aggregate that. That's simplistic, yeah?
Gotcha.
Now, the thing is, sanctions change on a day-to-day basis. So the answer is, when we next pull that data in, do we flag the data we've got as saying, right, okay, that person is no longer on a sanctions list? Or do we just say, you know what, that's historical data, get rid of it? Because what we want to do is present the latest list. So there's challenges, and it's about the business model you adopt. Do you want to keep historical data, or do you, and if you need to, you need to then say, right, that data set's going to keep growing and growing and growing. Or do you just say, you know what, that information is of no value, that's irrelevant, we don't need that anymore. Now, because that information we're getting is in the public use, we know we can retain it and we can do all kinds of stuff. But if you look at data privacy, the right to be forgotten, you're going to get individuals that say, right, okay, can you no longer hold my data? Then you have to get to that data and delete it. So the way you tag your information, the way you kind of expose it, your meta models, all of this kind of stuff is quite important. And that's what the data architect does. Data cleansing, getting rid of, duplicate records and all of that information of no value, that's a different ballgame. And the architect will, contribute to that, but that's more of a business operation.
Excellent. Well, thanks very much for deep diving, I think, Daljit. And as you said, I think each one of those stages is almost a talk on its own. There's a lot more to this. You went through the main level of it. So you have a book. You have another one upcoming, potentially. There are things going on. How can people find you, and how can they find out about you and what your latest contributions are?
Okay, well, the book is out there. The book is still available.
Excellent.
But the thing is this, I'm constantly creating new content. For me, it's I'm at that stage where I'm trying to share some of the knowledge that I've acquired. So my blog is one place to start. LinkedIn is another. If you want to connect, feel free. And EA Mindset is another.
Give us a better look at the t-shirt there. I didn't get a full view. I like that. I like that.
Oh, we've got the pens. We've got everything. We'll be running some courses next year, so hopefully that will go well. But on the EA Mindset website, we'll be sharing a lot of the information. Hopefully
fantastic. We'll add that all to the bottom of wherever this video gets published as well. Then I'll just.
Okay, but yeah, it's good talking with you again. It's been a while, and
absolutely, and
talk to you again in 2 years.
Yeah, look forward to it. Or maybe when some significant event happens, just let us know, and happy to have you back on again.
Yeah. Okay, great.
Cheers, Daljit. Take care.
Take care. Bye.
Thank you.